You're listening to the What's Happening podcast with Gary Watts.
Good morning. I'm here with Jason Taylor with the Bur Oak Land Trust. Jason, good morning.
Good morning, Gary.
How you doing on this cold winter morning?
Not too bad, trying to stay warm.
I just heard something that's like we've had 28 inches of snow, and I don't know where. I was scooping this morning and I had a hard time putting it. I had to figure out where I was going to put it. It was getting piled pretty high.
It's pretty wild. I heard the temperature differential between the hottest and the coldest it's been in Iowa this year is 164 degrees.
Oh, wow.
And so it's a little bit to think about when you want to live here. You got to be prepared.
Yeah, it's the fun part of being in Iowa. Tell us a little bit about your background. I know you're in the Marine Corps, and anyway, where you're from, can you just go through some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a southeast Iowa guy. I grew up in Van Buren County. My family actually came here from the state of New York, moved here the year I was born.
Oh, really?
They had a dairy farm back there, and they wanted to get into farming in Iowa. And unfortunately, farm crisis hit at the same time they came here. So pretty rough, time getting going with farms. And so my childhood was fantastic, lived in the country, nature all around me. I was outside as much as very possible. Went to a small school down there, and then when I was 17, came to Iowa City to go to the university. And this was the biggest city I'd ever lived in. I was in the country, no neighbors even.
Yeah.
And so it was quite the experience for me as a 17-year-old.
What was the school? Lacey Van Buren?
It was Van Buren County. I actually went to Harmony.
Harmony.
And
okay,
Harmony
yeah.
actually has now consolidated into Van Buren.
Right. It's right on the river, right?
Des Moines River.
Des Moines
Yeah.
River, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty down there.
Beautiful area, a lot of timber. I mean, that's really where I got my ethos with regards to a lot of the environmental concerns.
Yeah, that's cool. So you started getting an affinity toward that. So let's talk about, then you went into the Marine Corps, right?
I did, yeah.
Did you leave Iowa?
I did. So I was at the University of Iowa, decided, I really wanted something a little bit more, wanted to provide a little more service. My dad had been in the Marine Corps. And so I knew of it. I had a lot of interesting things, a lot of stories that he had told me. Yeah. And so there really wasn't any other question about like another branch. It was I was going to go into the Marine Corps or not. And so went to a recruiter, and I was a pretty good recruit, I would say, in terms of I was going to college, things like that. I had a pretty good background. So yeah, I went into the Marine Corps, and it was in the reserves to start. And then was activated and went to Iraq in 2005, 2006 with my unit and another unit based out of California.
Where was your basic training? Pendleton?
No, it was actually at Parris Island. So
Island.
yeah, I was actually able to go to South Carolina. That's where my dad had gone. So I actually had to put in a request because I was supposed to go over to the West Coast, but I was able to go over to Parris Island, which was storied ground over there.
A lot of snakes, a lot of swamps, a lot of
a lot of stuff. You don't really see too much. That's the beautiful thing about Parris Island. You don't see anything for 3 months. And so over in San Diego, where they have the boot camp, you're basically right next to the airport.
Ocean.
And so you see all sorts of other non-military things going on around you. Parris Island, there's nothing but military. And so you're really entrenched within it for a solid 3 months.
Tell us about the mindset of, if somebody's out there listening that wants to join the Corps. What'd you learn from it? What do you got to be prepared for to sign up? Tell us more about that.
Yeah, it's all about structure. And so they really do break you down, and they remake you into the person that they want you to be. And, 99% of the times, that's a better person. Sometimes people go into it, and it just does not fit with them. But the Marine Corps knows how to do it. They know how to take any individual, male, female, any walk of life, and they have the ability to turn them into a leader, to turn them into a Marine. And it still means a lot. I talk to people about the Marine Corps, and they're like, oh, I was thinking about joining the Marine, never did, or, I decided to go in the Army instead. It's one of those things where it's a different standard, I would say, for Marines.
Semper Fi, right?
That's Semper Fi, Semper Fidelis. Yep, always faithful.
I just noticed a deal. It's kind of sad that they haven't found these two SEALs. One of them fell out of a boat in the middle of the night. I don't know what landing craft they were on a mission. And his buddy went after him because apparently it's a buddy system, and they haven't found him yet in the Indian Ocean. So
yeah, I had
sad.
the great pleasure to do some training with some SEALs at Coronado.
Really?
I was a naval spotter for naval gunfire as well as artillery, and so I was able to work with some SEALs over in Coronado, and they are amazing. We would have a break from classes, and they would be out there doing pull-ups, doing push-ups, doing whatever, and then 10 minutes later, come back to class. Every chance they got that they were working out. And so that's just a completely different mindset with regards to those individuals and just like the level that they're going to be performing at, required to perform at.
Yeah. Well, I would think also if you're going to join the Corps, you want to be in shape, right?
You do, and it's a different type of shape. I'm not a big guy, and I think a lot of people think of these like big, burly, just muscle-bound.
Yeah.
And that's really not what they're looking for necessarily. I will absolutely say it's great to have those guys around and those women around. You're carrying some heavy stuff sometimes, and so it's nice to have people that can really put that on. But I think they're really looking for people who are athletic, people who have the ability to have a lot of endurance, people that are problem solvers, people that are pretty smart. You're asked to do a lot of very difficult things, sometimes when you're 18, 19, 20 years old. So you grow up very quickly. Yeah. And if you go into it with a mindset that they're looking for problem solvers versus robots, you have a good opportunity to make a career out of it, or at least learn a lot of lessons from it.
You were in Ramadi?
I was in Ramadi.
Was that door to door?
So 2005, 2006, Ramadi was not a good place to be for the military. So there was a lot happening. Our unit actually was responsible for running the detention facility there.
Oh, really?
And so we were the prison guards, if you will. And so there was a very small number of us. This was right after the Abu Ghraib controversy.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so all eyes were on us when it came to working with these individuals. And I think it was a really good job for me in a very bad location. And so we had a lot of rockets and mortars and things like that coming onto the base. I was able to get off base for some of the convoys that we would have to take some of the prisoners to Abu Ghraib. I was able to work with a lot of Navy Special Warfare, a lot of individuals that were coming in to do the interrogations. And I think my dad had actually been a prison guard at the federal prison, Fort Madison, for a short period of time. And he had always told me that, his job as a prison guard was to take care of those individuals no matter what they had done prior to getting there. And I took that idea with me when I went to Ramadi. And, there are individuals there who had been doing suicide bombings or like creating the vests, roadside bombings, snipers, and they were coming through our doors. And it's very easy to try to bring your own justice to them, but that's not our job. Our job was to take care of them. So we made sure they got their showers. We made sure we did their laundry, got them, clean clothes, good food, all of that stuff. That was our job there. And so it was a little bit different experience than a lot, but I'm very proud of the service that we did over there. And we really did change quite a few lives. It was a very interesting time in my life.
Good. So you got out of the Corps. Now tell us the next step.
Out of the Corps. So I came back. I had a business at the time working with an individual doing natural resource management. So things like prescribed fire. We were doing a lot of what's called timber stand improvement to try to, clean up woodlands, things like that. And I really needed a little more structure at that point in time. So I actually started working at Kirkwood, got into education, realized that I loved it. And University of Iowa has a phenomenal program in what's called educational measurement and statistics. It's the psychometrics program. This is where the ACT, Pearson, all these groups come from, is this psychometrics program at the University of Iowa. And it involves a lot of statistics, a lot of math, and so it just really appealed to me. So I got into that, went back, got my master's, and then started working in the nonprofit sector. I started working for a national nonprofit that was based out of Indianapolis, and it was the first nonprofit I'd worked for. Absolutely loved the concept of working in a less, it was different than a for-profit world, I would say. And from there, I went on to another nonprofit, realized that I just wasn't happy anymore. I just did not like working in the educational sector. A lot of things were changing at that time. And that's when I decided to go back into what my first passion was, which was natural resource management, working with the prairies, the woodlands, the wetlands of Iowa. And that's when I landed at Bur Oak Land Trust in 2018.
So I think one of the things we start talking about preserving the land and having trusts and woodlands, Iowa, back in the day, there wasn't any trees.
Correct.
It was just all, I suppose, grasslands. And I suppose the birds flew in and dropped seeds and planted, trees. And then it would burn quite periodically, every 3 years, 5 years, just Iowa would just burn, or the Midwest would burn, wouldn't it?
Absolutely.
And I don't think people realize the history of it. And that's why it's cool now that, we're preserving wetlands, we're preserving prairies, we're preserving the grasses, because that's what Iowa was. There wasn't really any woodlands.
It was about 98% prairie. And so you're looking, river to river, Missouri River to Mississippi River prairie. And then you would have trees where it was wet, which was the riparian zones, the rivers and the canals, things like that. But that's the only place that you'd really have trees. And those trees were there because when it burned, the wet areas wouldn't burn as frequently. And so that's when those trees would grow up. So you would have some areas like the oak savannas where you would have these fire-adapted trees like big oak trees that would still be able to live in the prairie around that fire. But most of the trees were only next to the rivers. You're totally right. there are more trees now in Iowa now than there were pre-settlement times. And so I'm all for trees. I think trees are fantastic. But I think that there is this mentality of planting trees is the answer to everything. You should be planting trees where there were trees. You should be reproducing wetlands where there were wetlands, prairies where there were prairies. Right now, we have most of it's gone in the state of Iowa. We're at about 80% row crop across the country, or across the state at this point. And most of that habitat, most of those native plants and animals simply are gone.
Well, they have a CRP program, which obviously farmers can get paid if they set aside ground, and they get paid so much an acre if they don't plant that. I think that's a neat program. I think there should be probably more with terraces to slow the water down. But I think the feds help them with that too. I think there's a lot of programs out there, aren't there?
There are, and a lot of that is voluntary. And so individuals can take it upon themselves to do those practices.
Right.
I think the biggest issue that we're going to face in Iowa in the future, habitat loss is huge. Just getting rid of all the native habitat is massive. That leads to a decrease in biodiversity. And that's probably the most critical thing on a worldwide scale when you have a reduction in the number of species at whole. And so that leads to less resilient ecosystems. You start having ecosystem crashes when you have too few species within that ecosystem. And we don't know when that's going to happen. We don't know where it's going to happen first, but we do know that it is going to happen. There's a report from the UN that shows about 2 million species are going to go extinct in the next couple hundred years.
Plants, you're talking species
plants,
of plants.
Animals, everything.
Oh, everything.
And so we don't know when that's going to happen, but we do know that it is going to lead to some pretty massive issues within those ecosystems. In Iowa alone, there are about 500 threatened and endangered species just in the state of Iowa. And most people would be absolutely shocked to see some of the stuff, the amazing native plants and animals that we have here.
What name some few? I mean, obviously, eagles came back.
Yeah.
What was killing eagles? DD-214 or?
Yeah, the DDT. So there's chemicals. It's such a complex ecosystem. They found that some of the chemicals and some of these pesticides and herbicides was causing the shells of the eggs to be thinner than normal, and therefore, when the eagles were sitting on them like they normally do, the shells couldn't support their weight and they would crack. And so that was, again, no one knew what that was going to happen.
Right.
So some of the amazing stuff that we have in the state of Iowa, we have a native cactus that actually grows not only in Iowa, but in Johnson County.
I didn't know that.
We have 36 native orchid species that grow in this state. So these are things that, people think about orchids. You see them in plant stores, and you're like, there's no chance that those things, surviving in my house, let alone outside. Or they grow in the tropics. We have 36 of them that grow within the state of Iowa. We have one of the only venomous mammals that lives in the world. It's called the least shrew. And this shrew actually produces a venom. There's very few. The platypus produces a venom. Very few mammals will produce a venom.
Is it like a bird?
It's a small, it looks like a mouse, basically.
Really?
It's like a little mouse. And the only way it can get that venom into its prey is by chewing it in. It doesn't have any fangs. And so these are amazing species. It paralyzes. The venom from this least shrew paralyzes the victim. So you're thinking grasshoppers, small things like that. Therefore, it will take it back to its lair, and the animal will still be alive, and then it'll eat it as it needs it in the winter. So the amazing things are happening all around us. But unfortunately, when you remove the habitat, you unfortunately remove all the species as well. And so the critical thing that we need to do is, I'm not saying that we have to get rid of all of agriculture. We know that it's here. We have to be smart about it. And so making sure our goal at Bur Oak Land Trust is to continue to find those hidden properties that still have high native biodiversity and do anything that we can to protect them and do everything we can to manage that land. Because as you know, if you have land, you have to manage it in the state of Iowa. If you don't, it's going to turn into invasive species, and it's going to be just an absolute mess.
Multifloral rose, that's a fun one.
I can name about 20 of them.
And wasn't that brought in, what's the history of multiflower rose? It had a good intent, didn't it?
It did. So it was brought in because it was used as a natural hedge. And so it was a plant species. There were a number of these. Garlic mustard was brought in as a food source. People use oriental bittersweet or round leaf bittersweet in wreaths, and then like you mentioned before, birds come eat the berries, and then they go off where and poop them out, and then all of a sudden you have oriental bittersweet everywhere.
Right.
So there's a lot of the good intent in these things, and so now we've really switched around from bringing in a lot of non-native species to solve problems to how can we do this with native species. And so there's a great research about if you plant natives, you support your native ecosystem, and absolutely everything works out better.
It's amazing, at the farm we have in Northeast Iowa, I see eagles flying around. And, at the Corville Lake, I don't know if you've been out there, we're just below the dam. It's full of eagles. They're probably out there now, probably going after fish. But if you've never seen an eagle and just stood there and watched them fly, and then I've seen them on the ground. They're not like their wingspan's
They're
huge.
massive.
I mean, in my mind, way larger than what you think. But I can see that's our national treasure is an eagle because they're so magnificent to watch them fly. And then I didn't realize the older males have the white and the younger ones aren't white at their head.
Brownish. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting when you start to get into eagles. But
it is, and when I was young, I'm not an old guy. I'm 44. When I was young, you did not see that many eagles.
Right.
So it has been a great success story, and so the research works by identifying the problems, attempting to solve some of them. We have the ability to save a lot of these species. But a lot of it comes down to the eagle is important to everyone because, again, it's the national bird. But there are so many other species that are so critically important that do not have that poster child mentality. And so we really have to think about it in terms of not necessarily how much money can these species make us, but if we lose them, we don't know what we're going to be missing. And so that's why it's so critically important that we protect everything.
What else? Give me some other ideas of some things we need to protect.
So water quality in Iowa is a big issue. And so one of the biggest things that we have right now is the rivers, the lakes, the streams. It's just all absolutely polluted. The amount of fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, absolutely all this stuff is just being dumped continuously into the water.
Right.
Failing septic systems around all the different reservoirs, that's a massive issue. And so the water quality problem leads to a lot of other issues. So fish species are starting to have declines. Mussel species in Iowa have taken a sharp decline. So if you think about mussels, those are filter feeders. And so these are things about, little clams, things like that. They're filtering all that stuff. They can't get out of the water. They're in the water forever. They filter all of that stuff into their system. And so any of the pesticides, herbicides, all those chemicals are being concentrated within those mussels. And so they're being impacted dramatically. Back in the day, Muscatine, if you've ever been over to Muscatine, they have the Pearl Button Museum. You ever been over there? It's amazing.
It is amazing.
It is amazing. And so what you see is you see these mussel shells from 100 years ago. And they're a quarter-inch thick, and they're hard. They're very, very hard. And they were able to punch them to get these buttons out of them. Now when you find mussels, the shells are incredibly thin. You can crunch them in your hand. You would never be able to do that with a mussel that was 100 years old because, again, all of these chemicals are leading to problems that are creating thinner shells. Thinner shells, predators can then eat them a lot more easily. And so there's all sorts of issues that we have with natural predators that are then able to eat these things, get rid of them.
So it affects everything, fish. What are we doing in the state of Iowa nationally for water quality? I understand Iowa obviously is an ag state, and there's going to be a lot of fertilizers and pesticides. And then what are we doing from a state and national level? And then what can the farming community do?
Yeah.
Or what are they doing in ag products?
So there's a lot of great research that's happening right now at the University of Iowa. And so I would absolutely encourage people to look into what the actual research is. A lot of the programs are voluntary, and that's some of the difficult things, is that none of this is being forced upon the individuals. And again, it's a financial issue. One of the easiest things that we could do is not plant crops in areas that flood all the time. It sounds like a crazy thing, but it's like we continuously, there are properties that I've seen that flood 1 out of 2 years, and they're still planting crops right up to those. They're allowing cattle to be right on those streams. And so all of that waste, all those pesticides, those chemicals are going very quickly into the waterways. And so if we just had the ability as a national program to eliminate a lot of those acres from production, that would solve not a lot, all the problems, but it would be a great start for us to solve, and it would be less of a headache for a lot of the farmers. They work so hard. Why work on areas that that are going to flood, not going to give you that crop? And so there's a lot of different things. I would absolutely encourage people to look into some of the work that the University of Iowa is doing with the water quality programs.
What about from the chemical companies? Are they working on modifying, more concentrated fertilizer that doesn't hurt the environment? Or I don't know anything about the fertilizer.
I don't know too much about on the
And
chemical side what they're
anhydrous.
doing. The difficult thing is these things are designed to kill plants.
Right.
For herbicides, they're designed to kill plants, and so it's a bit of an arms race, right? And so back in the day, we would have these Roundup ready soybeans, Roundup ready corn, and so then they would plant that, and then all of a sudden the plants evolve, the weeds evolve, and so now you need something that's a little bit stronger. And then you
Right.
need something a little bit stronger and stronger. And so they're continuously trying to build that new herbicide. There are some weed species out there, just like there are some, various contagions where they cannot be killed with certain pesticides anymore. And so it's an arms race that's unfortunate. They're not going towards the how can we make this better for the environment. They're going more towards the how can we kill more plants with this.
Well, I remember topsoil. I can remember I was a little kid and I don't know what we were doing. I think it was a winter. We were driving to Fort Dodge. I'll never forget it. And it was blowing snow and it was bad out. And I looked up and I go, wow, what's that? It was like a cloud of black dust or something. And that was topsoil blowing around. I go, and you don't see that anymore. But obviously back then they plowed the fields and went really deep. Then in the winter, when you had winds, that'd just blow around. So can you imagine how much soil we lost or just filled it in or whatever? So now you have no-till planting. You have a lot of things that they're practicing. I think that's way better for at least topsoil because I can't imagine how much runs off and then ends up in Louisiana.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why we have the dead zone down there, and that's why you have the Coralville Reservoir is silting in.
Right.
You have everything that can capture water, slow it down,
Right.
is going to be silting in, and some of that stuff is designed to do that, right?
Right.
And so the whole goal is with all of these different programs. The slower that you can get a drop of water that comes out of the sky, the slower that we can get it to this creek, the slower it can get to the river down to the Gulf of Mexico, the better.
Right.
Because the quicker it happens, all that stuff goes with it. All the energy takes more erosion with it, and so a lot of it is planting buffer strips. Not planting right up to the creeks and things like that. And so, there's definitely a lot of things that are available for the farmers to use.
Yeah, good. So let's talk about, let's get into Bur Oak Land Trust.
Yeah.
Exactly. Tell us about it, your organization, maybe some of the people you work with, your board. Let's say you have a piece of real estate and you go, I really don't want to plant it. You're in CRP. What can I do with it for your legacy or on down the road? So just let's go through let's talk about what you do.
Absolutely. So Bur Oak Land Trust, there are hundreds of land trusts all throughout the country. And within Iowa, there are a number. And the idea is that land trusts work to try to protect land for some reason. And so in Iowa, we're trying to protect the native resources that we've been discussing this whole time. And so if you think about wetlands, woodlands, prairies, those are in such short supply anymore that we need to be able to protect those. And so our mission, our goal, is to identify those areas of high biodiversity and to do anything that we can to protect them and then also to manage them. And so the organization's been around for 46 years now, based out of Iowa City. We work in eastern Iowa, and so we don't work in southwest, northwest Iowa. There are some other land trusts that do that. And they are amazing. And that's the one thing about the land trust world, the nonprofit world in general, is it's very collaborative. And that's the thing, like the level of competition is so small because we realize that so many people need to be involved in all of these things. And so we collaborate very closely with Iowa Natural Heritage Foundation. We collaborate very closely with the Nature Conservancy. These are the large organizations that also work to protect land in Iowa. And so we can either own the land. Bur Oak Land Trust owns a number of different properties in this area. So we have a Turkey Creek Preserve. There's a property called Muddy Creek that's over in Coralville. We have a property that's just donated a couple of years ago called the Coryell Nature Preserve over in Muscatine. And so all of these properties we own as as landowners, and then we work to manage them. And then we also have something that's called a conservation easement program, where if you as a landowner, you want to still own your property, but you want to make sure that it's never developed in the future, or people aren't going out there and building a bunch of houses on it or whatever. If you want to make sure that that happens after you pass on, you can put it into what's called a conservation easement, and that's an agreement, a legal contract that sits on the property, and we're the ones who are responsible for making sure that no one ever does those things that you wanted to make sure didn't happen. And so that you still own the land as a landowner, but you have these conservation easements that are placed on it as a legal protection.
How many acres does Bur Oak own?
We have about 600 acres that we own.
Okay.
We have about 300 acres that we have in conservation easements at this time. And we're always looking to, there's a number of projects that we're currently doing. We're very particular about the properties that we take on, because we know that as a small land trust, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We don't want to get a bunch of properties that we cannot manage. And so we're very selective about the ones that we can appropriately manage ourselves through our staff as well as our AmeriCorps program.
Tell us what you have to do to manage one. There's probably, you got to burn, you got to mow, you're planting things. I mean, tell us about management.
Yeah, the biggest thing is you want to know what you have. And so we do a lot of survey work to determine what's actually out there. And so we're just finishing up a survey on the Coryell Nature Preserve. There's about 350 plant species on that one particular piece of property. And so figuring out what all those are, that then allows you to say, okay, what shouldn't be there? What are the invasives that we want to get rid of? What should be there but isn't? And then you start thinking about, okay, maybe there's some planting or seeding or something that we can do. But the big thing is trying to restore the fire regime. So you mentioned earlier, Iowa used to burn.
Yeah.
So all of these native plants evolved with fire. And so the number one way to manage land in the state of Iowa is via fire. Yeah. And so we do a lot of work to get ready for the first burns. You have to do a lot of prep work, and so creating good breaks. There's a lot of science that goes into prescribed fire, and so you hear a lot about people just kind of going off and lighting their properties on fire. Yeah. It's very dangerous. People die every single year by doing this, and so we have a crew that is I'm incredibly proud of. And they're all trained wildland firefighters. And we have the ability to go out there. We have the equipment. We have the knowledge. I've been burning for about 24 years at this point. And so myself, we have our director of conservation, our land steward. We are all professionals in this field. And we have the ability to train more people with our AmeriCorps program as well as other individuals in the community. So yeah, the burn program is probably the number one way that we are able to manage the land that we have. But then there's a lot of cutting down of trees that shouldn't be there. We cut a lot more trees down than we plant, and that surprises a lot of people. But you brought it up earlier. There are more trees in Iowa now than before, right. And so our responsibility isn't to put necessarily more trees on the land, but it's to take ones off that shouldn't be there.
Tell us about tree management or woodland management. What's it take to manage a tree farm?
Yeah, well, tree farms are a little bit different because tree farms, that's production. And so the work that we do isn't necessarily for production. The work that we do is for the habitat. And so we think about things like what's going to be good for the owls, what's going to be good for the bats, what's going to be good for the birds. With tree farms, they're often thinking about how can I get this tree, this walnut tree, to grow as tall and as straight and as quickly as possible. And so it's different ideas. And so you often have, straight rows so you can mow between them and all these different things. What we do is we try to be very natural. And so when I look at a woodland, the first thing that I see is too many trees. You'll have oak trees that have a lot of trees growing up underneath those oak trees, those limbs. You would never have that naturally. Never would have that. When the oak leaves drop, that's fantastic fuel for fires. And so historically what would have happened is all of that oak leaf would have burned off at some point in time, and anything that was growing up underneath there probably would have been cooked off as well. And so we go through and we do what's called daylighting of oaks. Anything that's underneath a big oak tree that's important to us, we'll just get rid of. We'll cut all of those trees out. And then we look and see at the rest of the habitat, the rest of the trees around there. There are often times where we want to eliminate 50, 60% of the trees in a woodland to open it up. there are these great reports of when the pioneers, the settlers were going across the state of Iowa. And they said that they could take a wagon train 3 wagons wide across any woodland in Iowa. That's how open it was. So wagons are big. 3 wagons wide. So the spacing of the trees was so big. Now there are so many woodlands in Iowa that, you or I would have very difficult time walking in a straight line because there's so much brush, there's so many invasives, there's so many little trees. And so trying to open it up and get more light back onto the ground is a critical thing. Reduction of canopy is what we would call it. And so getting rid of a lot of the trees so that sunlight actually hits the ground, that's critical.
Well, I think a lot of, I don't know if it's prevalent in Iowa, but in western states, they need more burns. They need to burn the brush. I remember going to San Diego like 10 years ago, and I was out riding my bike, and I looked around. It just seemed like there was brush everywhere, and it just light on fire, just like. And I don't know whether controlled burns are good for the forests, aren't they?
They are.
And to handle things like that, it just seems like you got to be on top of it.
You do, and it's called fuel reduction. And so if you think about it, all the stuff that you just talked about, all that brush, all that dead stuff, that's all fuel for the next fire. Yeah. And so if you have the ability to get rid of that prior to the fire, that's only going to benefit you. And so there's actually another program that I work with that does what's called fire mitigation work. And it works with homeowners to do what's called a fire-wise program. So communities can adopt these practices that allow them to be more prepared for the next wildfire. And so it's very simple things, and especially out west when you're in Colorado and some of these areas, everyone should be thinking about it out there. But wildfires are coming to the Midwest. Kansas, Nebraska, western Iowa, we're starting to have wildfires on a fairly frequent basis. And a lot of this comes down to, when it's a drought in Iowa and all this fuel is out there, you have fields that are burning. You have, prairies and woodlands and things like that are burning. And so it is going to be coming this way. We need to start thinking about the fire mitigation and the fire-wise communities in Iowa.
So I just heard a report on, I think it was last night on the news, they were talking about how great the snowfall is for the farmers. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about, woodlands and prairies. What's the snow cover doing right now since we just came through a really severe drought?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's good to get that ground moisture back, recharge that ground moisture. Prairies are not going to be impacted that much by droughts. The small droughts that we have, it's not a big deal. And so there are often times where, my lawn at home is about 50% prairie and 50% grass. And the grass will be all dried up in the summer. And the prairie, it'll look just completely normal. Huh. And that's because the roots of the grass that we use for a traditional lawn in the United States, the roots are maybe half an inch to an inch deep. They're very, very thin. The roots for prairie plants are anywhere from a foot to 12 foot deep. And so they have the ability to draw on water sources that are much, much, much deeper than they would normally. And so that's why, like corn, for instance, corn has incredibly shallow roots.
Right.
So corn is going to be impacted very quickly by drought conditions, whereas if you had other plants that would be, deeper roots, not annual plants, but perennial plants, they're not going to be impacted nearly as quickly as some of the other non-native species.
So let's talk about wildlife like deer management and other types of pets. I don't know if coyotes, that's kind of a natural cycle with deer. Talk about wildlife itself and birds. And, we talked a little bit about eagles and squirrels and rabbits. Just how do you help with that, or how do you manage that?
Absolutely. So the bad news, we're losing birds at an unprecedented rate. There's about 55 billion fewer birds, on whole, as in the North America as there was in the 70s.
Why is that?
So it's just because of all the stuff that we've been talking about. Habitat loss is the number one thing. If birds don't have places to live, if mussels don't have places to live that are clean, if any of these animals, plants, don't have places to live, then they're going to go away. And so when you lose habitat, you lose all the species that are there. And so with regards to birds, a lot of the issues are we're seeing a reduction in raptors. All the raptors that are, very important to the ecosystems, they're simply going away. The avian bird flu that we had, that took out a lot of different birds. And so we're unfortunately seeing a lot more of that type of stuff. Deer, A little bit different. In Iowa, big success story with deer. They're everywhere,
Yeah.
and so we do actually have on some of the properties that we manage. We do allow for herd management, is what we would call it, which is we have archery hunting for the removal of some deer. It's a little controversial, but most of Iowa recognizes that you do need some controlled hunting in some areas. The one thing I think that is unfortunate is that we still do allow predator hunting in the state of Iowa. So you mentioned coyotes. Coyotes are so absolutely critical to the ecosystem, and they're treated as pests.
Right.
Bobcats, mountain lions, all of these things that used to be much more common in the state of Iowa, they're often treated. If there's any sort of chance that there's a mountain lion in the state of Iowa, the next thing you hear about is how someone killed that mountain lion.
Yeah.
And so it's absolutely unfortunate. And there's a lot of people scared of a lot of these things. I'm not sure when the last mountain lion attack was in the state of Iowa, but it was a long time ago.
They're scared of us more than we are. Kids.
Absolutely.
They're going to run away.
And so it's really important that we protect the stuff that is protecting the ecosystem. And predators are incredibly important to the ecosystems. And unfortunately, they're often the ones that are taken out. You see this out west with the wolves, the wolf reinduction. That's a very, very amazing program, but it's very controversial because people think that they're going to kill the livestock. So,
but I know they reinstated 5, 6 wolves, big gray from Canada, and I don't know how that's doing, but they took them into Yellowstone, I think.
Yeah, there's a number of programs like that, and it's very difficult to do it well. Anytime you try to reintroduce a species, it needs to be done very, very thoughtfully. But it's necessary in some of those areas. They're doing a lot of work right now in various states, in California and other places, reintroducing beaver to the landscape. Because beaver are so critical. Beaver are the best firefighters. Because what happens
Take the
is
trees around the pond.
you have a stream,
Yeah.
and beavers will dam it up. And what happens is that water spreads out all of a sudden. So now instead of having this narrow corridor of saturated soil, you have this massive area that's all saturated. The soil's all saturated with water, and so that's not going to burn nearly as well as all the dry area around it. And so the reintroduction of beaver is amazing. We have one property where we have phenomenal beaver dams on, and it's magical.
Right.
And the work that they do cannot be replicated. It would take millions and millions of dollars to do the work that one grouping of beavers do for us.
I saw something on National Geographic that kind of showed them underwater and how they build their, I don't know, cave or hut or whatever.
Yeah.
It is fascinating. And their teeth are huge.
Their teeth are amazing. And actually, I should have brought them. I found a beaver skull one time, and the teeth on the beaver skull are curved like this, and they kind of go back up into the skull, but they're orange on the outside. And I was really curious about that. I was thinking, why are those orange? So the teeth of the beaver has a high concentration of iron, and iron turns orange like rust, right? And so what happens is the outside is very, very hard, but the inside of the tooth has no iron on it. And so when they're eating, the inside of the tooth is going to continually wear away at a faster rate, and therefore it creates a chisel point on that tooth, because the outside doesn't wear away, but the inside does, and so it creates a chisel point on that tooth. That's what allows them to eat into the wood. Beaver are amazing.
They are. It's a fascinating how they can just take a tree down fairly fast.
Yeah, it's pretty wild.
Around it, take it to a point, and go. So let's go back to let's say you have a piece of ground, and so I'm sure you don't mind getting a call and say, hey, check this out, Jason. We're thinking about leaving it a legacy to the county or Bur Oak Land Trust or whatever. What are you looking for when you say you want to be, you have 600 acres? And by the way, before I forget about it, the Turkey Creek one, that's out Sugar Bottom.
Yes.
If I'd tell everybody, if you haven't been there, go out there and just go for a walk, go for a jog, whatever you want to do. It's fantastic. You got a lot of little things for birds, little birdhouses going along the stream there, the prairie grasses. I mean, you can go back there quite a ways.
You can. We have a number of trails out there. We do have maps. We've created some new maps, and so if people want to see the maps that we have, it's about 107 acres. And that's a great success story. And you were mentioning before, getting that call. So that was one of the first properties that was donated to Bur Oak Land Trust, and it came from a number of families, including the Gelmans and Lazanskis in Iowa City.
Right.
And it is just a great success story. Or that land out there had previously been tilled. It was agriculture. and we've been able to restore it since then to the point where it's not functioning as a true native remnant prairie, but it's pretty close, and we have a lot of great plants and animals out there. We actually have a population of the endangered rusty patch bumblebee out there. And so that's a good sign that we've recreated this prairie to the point where we have the ability to support endangered species. That's a massive success for it.
Tell me about education a little bit, because when we're sitting here talking about all this, to me, children need to be out. They need to be looking at wetlands and understand it. They need to know, where did Iowa come from? Well, we used to be all prairies. Talk about the trees, the birds, the plant life. To me, they should relish this, what you're doing. How do they get educated?
Yeah.
And where do they go to see stuff?
When I was a kid, as I mentioned before, I had creeks and fields and ponds around my house. I was never inside. I was constantly out there just doing that stuff, walking around, finding things, right? That doesn't happen nearly as much anymore. And there's this idea of nature deficit disorder.
Right.
Kids, adults, they're removed from nature. And if you're removed from something, you're not going to care about it.
Right.
And so one of the things that we're doing, we have a conservation education program, especially with our AmeriCorps program, where we have individuals who are actually working to develop new programming to try to show kids that nature is exciting. And so anything that you can do to get kids or adults on the land is important. So in the summer, we have what's called our crayfish crawl, where at Turkey Creek, we invite families out, and we provide a safe opportunity where kids and their parents and grandparents and whomever are walking in the creek. Now, when I was a kid, that was a Saturday, right? Yes. But this might be the only time that these families feel comfortable doing that, because they just haven't been exposed to it. Right. And so we want to provide a lot of opportunities to reconnect people with nature in a very safe and comfortable way, and that's where the magic happens. And so to see the look on these kids' face when they find a crayfish, or when they find snails, or when they slip and they fall in the water and they get up and they're just like, covered in mud, but they're smiling, they're so excited. Those are incredibly important to us. So the education of the community around nature is a vital mission, part of our mission. We do it through a number of other programs. In the spring and kind of late winter, we have what's called the Prairie Preview, and this is just an example where individuals come together. We have a lot of tables, and they talk about what their organizations are doing with regards to nature. And so, like I said, it's a collaboration. All of these groups that are doing things, you mentioned the county, Johnson County Conservation has phenomenal properties. They have a lot of they have naturalists that will work with kids and parents to show them what nature is. And so we try to provide these forums that allow individuals to get together to talk about all of these important things.
Plus, the other thing is you're not playing on your phone out there, are you?
It's an issue.
Phone aside.
Absolutely, it's an issue, and I think that people feel naked without those devices. And so my wife and I used to go hiking out in like the canyon country of Utah and Joshua Tree and stuff like that. And one of the best things about it is you can have a phone with you, but it's going to be useless because there's just no signal out there. And so it's nice to be disconnected in some way. And I think that most people, they talk about how like, I want to unplug and recharge and stuff like that. You're constantly plugged in. It's really about replugging into what's around you, being present in the environment. If you go walking out at Turkey Creek or any of our properties when it's snowing and it's quiet,
nothing better,
and you don't hear anything except for the snowfall and maybe the creek over here, and then all of a sudden there's a deer. It's magical.
You can't explain it.
You cannot, and so few people experience it anymore. And it's a shame.
Yeah, it is a shame.
And so what we're trying to do is not only are all of our properties, most of our properties are open to the public, and it's free. And we do that for a very specific reason. You shouldn't have to pay to have exposure to nature.
Right.
That's critical.
Right.
Because I don't care if you are the poorest, the wealthiest person, you need to be able to go out there and experience what it looks like. To find that amazing mushroom that you've never seen before, or to see that eagle nest that you've never seen before. You need to be able to do that no matter what your economic status.
Another great place just near this Turkey Creek Preserve is the backside of Sugar Bottom bike trails.
Oh,
if
yeah.
you walk in there with the fir trees, it's snowing like you talked.
Yep.
There's not a better trail in Iowa, I don't think, when you walk into
It's
the
amazing.
backside of Sugar Bottom.
And we have that whole area. So up there, the Johnson County owns Chongaleska-Wakan, that whole property up there. We have the Big Grove Preserve next to it. The Army Corps has, hundreds of acres, thousands of acres all around the reservoir there, Hawkeye Wildlife Area.
Right.
And one of the important things for us is thinking about the interconnected nature of all of these properties. And so it's one thing if you have a 40-acre piece here, a 40-acre piece here. They need to be connected because wildlife need to move from one to the other. A bobcat might have hundreds of square miles in their natural roaming area, but if they have to cross 218 in order to get to that next piece of property where they can hunt, they're going to have a hard time doing that. And so the more interconnected we can make these properties, the better. And so oftentimes we'll try to focus on areas that are close to rivers because rivers are natural corridors for wildlife. And so the work that we're doing at the Coryell Nature Preserve is right on the Cedar River. And there are a lot of other properties that's owned by the Nature Conservancy or the Muscatine County Conservation or the DNR all around there. That's what's really critical for us is to try to find those types of properties.
So the Bur Oak Land Trust, just to sum this up, is a trust where you can put your ground into it and you can perpetuate your legacy, but it'll never be developed. And you guys will maintain it, and you can, I'm sure, get a tax loss or tax write-off, whatever that is.
Yep.
So you get a little tax benefit, and you're doing something great for nature and society. And what a neat thing! I think more people need to look at it. How do you help Bur Oak Land Trust? How do you donate? What's the avenues that fundraisers you have?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have obviously on our website, there's a page where people can go to donate. So it's buroaklandtrust.org. That's the website.
Okay.
That's kind of the easy way, I would say. Coming to what I love to do is I love to give tours. And I love to, anyone that's out there, and I love to put this out there, contact us and request to go on a tour of one of our properties. Because it's one thing to go out there and kind of wander around, but to go out there with someone who is actively managing that land that can talk about it, to point out these things, it's really is magical. And so I love to do that because what I want to do is I want to have donors that care about that land as much as we do. And so anytime we have the ability to connect with people via hikes on those properties or tours on those properties, it means the world to us. And so I would say start by doing that. Come out with us and see if you like the organization, see if you like the people, and then choose to donate if you want to. That's what really means a lot to us. We also work through a number of other organizations or with a number of organizations in the community. We have an event in the fall called Golden Hour. We were able to work with the Webster restaurant, and then we had this amazing dinner where individuals came, and it was some of the best food I've ever had. And so Sam Gelman, again, the Gelmans, one of the reasons we selected them is because of that legacy their family had started with Turkey Creek. We wanted to, Sam was passing that down, basically. We had this amazing meal there. We're going to be doing the same thing, hopefully, this fall. So yeah, there are events that we have that are ticketed events, that are paid events. All of those funds are put back into the land that we are trying to protect, allows us to either purchase more land in the future or to manage the land that we currently have right now.
And you mentioned the Webster. Isn't it in the top 10 restaurants in the nation? Or
on my list it is, for sure.
It's fantastic. And, and Gelman came from New York City, didn't he? Was he a chef there?
I believe he was before,
before COVID or something, or came back here. I don't know exactly. Anyway, Jason, this has been fantastic. I'm glad he came in. If you haven't had a chance to go out and see nature, do it. Go for a walk. Call you to get a tour. You're really missing something if you're not doing it. So anyway, this has been a blast. Thanks, Jason.
Excellent. Thanks, Gary. And I want to say that the idea of having this podcast really is amazing. There are so many people in our community that have great stories, that are doing amazing things. Yeah. And so the fact that you're taking some time out of your busy schedule to have these conversations really does mean a lot to me.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
Thank you.